Welcome back to the Kyber Collective. I'm one of your three hosts, Sig, and I'm joined by Flowers.
Hi.
And Annie.
Hello.
And today we are tackling the Jedi Apprentice series.
Ooh, this is exciting.
So, this is one of kind of a loose three-part series of shit we really like about Star Wars we thought would be fun to talk about. So we're each bringing kind of like a passion project or something that we're particularly fond of or interested in to talk about. And I have gone with the Jedi Apprentice series of books, which is a series of children's books. It's also known as Obi-Wan's No Good, Very Bad Childhood, at least in my house.
Poor guy.
It really is the sad, sordid tale of all the things that went horrifically wrong in his childhood.
He's had a hard time, man. He's had a hard time.
Yeah, he's definitely had a hard time.
He did. And I think that these books are actually like kind of formative for a lot of kids who grew up in the like prequels era. So like, I guess 90s-ish kids, because they were written around, I think the first one was written around the same time as The Phantom Menace, and they were kind of coming out and they were at every single scholastic book fair. And tended to float around like school libraries and things. And so a lot of people have kind of dipped in and out of them at one point or another.
Yes, I remember seeing them in the scholastic circulation of books in school, and I bought some of them when I was a little youngling at the time. And yeah, I would agree with that. They were definitely a little bit formative.
Yeah, which I think is like a good and a bad thing, because they've introduced some kind of weird concepts to the Jedi, especially because they were written, like, if you think about it, it was written before even Attack of the Clones had come out. And they have some interesting characterizations of Qui-Gon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I found that they kind of, I think, permeate fandom a little bit. So we'll start with a brief summary of the book series and then see if I can get your guys' thoughts as to how much you think this has influenced fanon, and maybe we can talk through it. My summary is going to be the fastest, loosest, lacking detail summary you can possibly imagine of this series.
Great. I love it already.
We're going to hit the high points and the high points only. I encourage you to read these books if you haven't already. They're super quick to read. They're super fun. And if you want a taster of them, one of our favorite podcasts, The Moisture Farm Report, has done an episode on the Jedi Apprentice books and Baby Obi-Wan. Yes. And they do a very good job of kind of illuminating why they're so incredibly delightful. So that's a good taster session if you're not sure.
Yes, we adore them. They're awesome.
They are. They're so good. The basic summary is Obi-Wan is turning 13, and in the Jedi Order, when you turn 13, they either assign you to a master and make you a padawan, or they send you to some godforsaken planet to do menial labor. And that's clearly how the Jedi Order works. So he is not a very good little Jedi. He has an arch nemesis called Brak Chun.
Brak Chun, who I affectionately call Bok Choy.
Yes, bok choy. And they're constantly fighting. They're at each other's throats. Obi-Wan does not have enough emotional control, and he can't find a master anywhere. And he desperately begs Qui-Gon, please, please, let me be your Padawan. And Qui-Gon says no. And Qui-Gon has sworn he will never take another Padawan again. So he misses his last chance. He turns 13, he's nearly 13, and he gets sent to a planet called Bandamir to join the Agri-Corps. So they decided he would make a really good farmer. But Yoda, in all of his machinations, decides to send Qui-Gon on the same ship to Bandamir. And shenanigans ensue, obviously.
Obviously.
On this adventure, we learn that Qui-Gon had a previous Padawan called Xanatos, who fell to the dark side and now runs a mining corporation, as one does. Obi-Wan gets kidnapped by slavers, manages to free himself, gets a bomb strapped to him, and says he'll blow himself up to save Qui-Gon. And Qui-Gon looks at this tiny 12-year-old boy with a bomb strapped to him and goes, "That's Padawan material." So he takes him.
That is so Obi-Wan in a lot of respects.
It's just so sad. So then they're Master and Padawan. You would think this is like everything is going to be good from now on, but of course it isn't. The next thing that happens is Obi-Wan goes to a planet called Melida Dawn, and Qui-Gon is there to rescue another Jedi called Tal, who it turns out he is in love with. And Tal has gone blind and is horrifically injured. And Obi-Wan, arriving on this planet, thinks that it's quite a bad thing that everyone is trying to kill each other in this massive civil war. And there's this group called the Young, who he joins up with because the Young are trying to stop the war. And he's now 13 and thinks this war should probably be stopped. A lot of innocent people are pointlessly dying. Qui-Gon says, no, we got to go. Tal's really injured, so we got to take her back to the temple. We don't get involved in this kind of thing. And Obi-Wan says, well, we should get involved in this kind of thing. People are dying. And Obi-Wan says, get in the car or I'm leaving you right here. So he doesn't get in the car. So Obi-Wan leaves him in the middle of a civil war.
Oh, boy.
Wow.
Was it Obi-Wan or Qui-Gon leaves him in the middle of a civil war?
Sorry. Yeah, Qui-Gon leaves him in the middle of a civil war. So Obi-Wan, 13-year-old, fighting in a civil war. Qui-Gon takes off with Tal and heads back to the Jedi Temple. Things do not go well for Obi-Wan. He kind of falls in love with a young girl and she dies, as everyone does who Obi-Wan ever falls in love with.
It's a curse, this poor guy.
Honestly. So then he's, having a really miserable time fighting this war. And Qui-Gon thinks, maybe I probably shouldn't have left this 13-year-old child behind. And some weird stuff is happening to the Jedi Temple. So he goes, I'll probably pick him up or something. So they become reunited. And the weird stuff happening at the Jedi Temple is that Xanatos, our evil former padawan of Qui-Gon, is back. And he's trying to kill everyone. And he's brought Bruk Chun, who has now gone evil as well. Bruk Chun dies horrifically. And Obi-Wan tries to save him. And it's almost kind of like Scar and Mufasa, except Obi-Wan is actually trying to save his life, not fling him off but they're kind of on the top of a waterfall and Bruk falls to his death and it's really horrible and Obi-Wan has horrific nightmares. And then they go kill Xanatos, where Xanatos kills himself, but they hunt him down. And it's the kind of tenor of the book is that how nice, the band's back together. Obi-Wan forgives Qui-Gon, Qui-Gon forgives Obi-Wan. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan has some very obvious PTSD and Qui-Gon is not winning any Parent of the Year awards.
No, he's not. Yeah, they're really having a time, I think, in the first few books with this series.
They're so dark. And then, finally... there are a couple more, there's some other bits that happen in between, but I'm going to end with Tal, the woman that Qui-Gon is in love with, dies, and Qui-Gon really struggles to get over it, and there's a massive rift that forms between him and Obi-Wan, which eventually is kind of healed. And then at the end of the books, Obi-Wan is 19, the Phantom Menace happens, and then there's another series about him and Anakin. But that's kind of a whirlwind tour of the incredibly shit childhood that Obi-Wan had.
The eternal sadness of being Obi-Wan.
The eternal sadness of being Obi-Wan.
So that, I have read, I think the first 10 or 11 books in the Jedi Apprentice series, and it's really wild, the kind of the storylines that were established in this series, right? Before any of the other movies came out. Yeah,
it's a very weird way of kind of imagining the Jedi. We have a fallen Padawan, which doesn't really... Xanatos uses the dark side, and he left the Jedi Order, but it's not clear that... I don't think he's a Sith in these books, but it does seem a bit unusual based on what we find out later in the films about the Jedi Order, that this would have happened. The thing about kids being thrown out when they hit 13 to go... either they have to make it as a Jedi Knight or they go and join the Agri Corps, or I think it's implied that there's a medical corps and research and a handful of other things that the Jedi do throughout the galaxy. That was made up for these books.
Yeah.
And then the incredibly weird relationship between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon in these books was all... None of this is really reflected in the films particularly strongly. But I do think that it's quite heavily reflected in fanon. I have seen a lot of people be very critical of Qui-Gon based on stuff that happens in these books. And what I find interesting about them is that they are legends, so they're not technically canon. Mm-hmm. But if they were, I think we would have a very different picture of Qui-Gon. So I guess my first starting opening discussion question is, based on that summary, what do we think about Qui-Gon in these books?
I think he's emotionally distant, and I think he's a lot less forgiving and a lot less kind than I perceive him to be in The Phantom Menace and in other subsequent places he might turn up. And it really paints a strange relationship between him and Obi-Wan, because it's a lot of Obi-Wan trying to make sure that he is the Padawan that Qui-Gon wanted, and Qui-Gon is kind of like, I guess you're my Padawan. It's like, there's not that. I feel like there's one-sided emotional investment, and I feel like Obi-Wan has had a really weird experience as Qui-Gon's Padawan, and I don't feel like it aligns very well with how we see their relationship in The Phantom Menace, because I see a very trusting, established, easy relationship with them. Yeah, they're not like Obi-Wan will disagree with things that Qui-Gon says, and it's just like, you should just, I think I know what I'm doing here. And they have a good working relationship, and there's clearly a lot of care in there. And I feel like it was a little, based on, having read it, but also your summary of it, I think it establishes a little uncertain picture of what their relationship was like and what the Jedi Order was like. And I don't like it.
Yeah.
I haven't read them, honestly. I think that in The Phantom Menace, they have they have an interesting relationship. Like, Obi-Wan, you can tell that he's been frustrated with him before, but I don't think it's because it doesn't feel like it's because he didn't exactly have like a great parent, but more like he's just like, oh my gosh, again, like, this is why we can't have nice things kind of feeling,
Yeah.
And then he's obviously kind of comfortable enough with him enough to say like things like, why do I feel like you've picked up another life form,
Another pathetic life form.
Thank you. Another pathetic life form. It's so like they had this honesty with each other, It's like they really did care about each other,
Yeah.
I think that, I have always noticed that fan fiction sort of like paints certain characters a certain way, because and I understand writers going back to this material for research, but I think that it's also, at this point in the game, I think it's also, you kind of have to look at that series as its own fan fiction, honestly.
Yeah, that's exactly, because it's juicy. Like, the idea that Obi-Wan was left in a war zone alone at 13, that they have this quite fractious relationship, that Qui-Gon had a secret love who was also in the Jedi Order and then died, that he had like an evil Padawan, and that Obi-Wan like helped take him down but never quite lived up to the greatness that was Xanatos before his fall, and then the parallels with Anakin.
I think also that I mean, I know this is written a while ago, but I'm also kind of tired of the trope of master doesn't want to take on another apprentice because something bad happened.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just kind of over that.
Yeah.
Like, I will never teach again. Yeah,
Yeah, you will. You're just going to do it kicking and screaming.
Yeah.
Right. Or like a kid comes into your life and he like warms your cold, dead heart.
That is honestly this, though. I mean, it was like they were doing this before it was cool, right? Like, but now it's so tired. Like, looking back on it, you're like, oh my God, again? Like,
because like this was kind of the OG, right? Because you had like the scrappy young Obi-Wan who was like, I'm just going to kill myself for you, Master, and help you live a good life. And Qui-Gon's like, my God, come here! Like, I will take care of you. And that was the first real, I guess, dynamic we got to see in this prequel era with that, in terms of supplementary content. But it's definitely worn out, and it's definitely, for me, maybe you guys would agree too, kind of lost its appeal to me. Like, I went into this franchise loving the young and parental kind of relationship, and now I'm like, I'm over it. I'm just, please show me anything else.
Yeah, no, like I'm desperate to read something different.
Yeah.
Where it's full of reluctant masters. I think one of the best master apprentice sort of vibe I've ever gotten was with Caleb and
Deepa. I was just gonna say.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's not even like they had a whole book together. They had like a comic, but you could tell that she actually wanted him to be there. Like she wanted to be his master from the beginning. I assume. I don't. They just had a really nice relationship.
Yeah.
Deepa is particularly, I think, just a very magical soul because her master was Mace Windu, and Shatterpoint really showed just how much love there was there and how much he loved her and thought of her in when he raised her, and it's just beautiful, you know.
Yeah.
I've adored those kind of stories too. Please show us more of like, I want to teach you and you're my family now.
Yeah, maybe it's not as sexy, but I realize that that's not a good word to say when talking about a teacher and a student.
I know what you mean, though, because like I think this is very of an era, and it's that specific drama. Because at least when I was growing up, there were loads of like kids' books and teen books that were like, one child in an impossible situation should have died 10 times, but somehow scrapes through. Like there was this book series about like kids who survived the apocalypse. There was like. And then there's like the Maze Runner and all the Hunger Games stuff. I mean, that's a little past my time, but I think that's the final evolution of this. But I think the like over drama of like the irreality of this small child like having bombs strapped to him and being kidnapped by slavers and then joining a civil war. It was very similar to the rest of what I was reading at that age, which probably explains a lot about why I am the way I am. But like but like I think it is very of an era, but it's like it's so over the top, and it just like it's so funny to read it now as an adult and then think about like that being a vision of the Jedi Order. But like obviously the writers were clearly looking for like some kind of dramatic plot to happen to baby Obi-Wan, because if it was like 20 books of him learning diplomacy, it might not have sold as well.
Yeah, that's the downside, because you got to keep it spicy and keep it engaging, especially for a younger audience. So I understand the choices that were made, but they're not canon anymore. That's one big one for me. Yeah. And I don't love the choices that it made. I adored this series. I say this out of love because I had a lot of fun reading it.
Yeah, I love these books. I mean, I wouldn't have chosen them if I didn't love these books. I think they're ridiculous. I think they're comedically over the top. But I think there's something about the profound sadness of Obi-Wan's childhood here that circles around to just being hilarious to me.
Yeah.
Like, it's just so over the top. Like, you know, Qui-Gon doesn't want him. No one wants him. He's the loser of the Jedi Temple. He's bullied by a guy whose name is Bruck Chun. Like, it's just...
That's horrible. It just sounds like the Karate Kid or something. It's just horrible.
Yeah, it's super depressing. Like, he just has a hard time constantly.
Yeah,
just like bullies and
and bullies, and then bombs, and then I mean, he doesn't have a quiet afternoon ever in these books.
I like to think that Obi-Wan at least had one nice period of his life. You know, one in which he 100% enjoys. I would like to think that, you know.
Yeah, poor guy. I mean, well, with this book series, he certainly didn't. He went from one crisis to the Anakin Padawan crisis to all that happens next. So he's had a hard time his whole life.
Yeah. What I do find interesting is how much this bleeds into... I see it a lot in fan fiction, and I see it a lot in discussions about Star Wars. And I think it's people who read the books, and sometimes people who haven't even read the books but have heard about like plot points from these books. And it is very difficult to know what is canon and isn't within the Star Wars corpus because it's so massive. So I'm definitely not criticizing anyone for not knowing one way or another, but it bleeds in quite heavily. So this idea that like Obi-Wan's life has sucked at every stage is quite firmly entrenched. And I find in a lot of places, so is the idea that Qui-Gon was very cruel to Obi-Wan, and it seems to hinge just on that one scene of when Qui-Gon kind of casts Obi-Wan aside and says that he'll take Anakin as his apprentice, which all that we have is that one scene. So if you're just looking at the films, like, that could be a moment of personal failure for Qui-Gon, but it could have been the only moment of personal failure that he's ever had in his relationship with Obi-Wan, or it could be a symptom of their entire time together. And I find that it tends to get interpreted as the latter quite often, and I think it's because people are thinking about the time that Obi-Wan was left during a civil war because Qui-Gon had to get his girlfriend to the hospital. Like, and it's interesting how, I was just going to say, it's interesting how much of an effect that it's had on fanon and the way people talk about these characters.
That's always so interesting how, like, some little, like, tiny little thing will ignite, like, an entire fandom to write that, like, over and over and over again. That's insane. Because I've always just thought of Qui-Gon saying, okay, well, I'll teach Anakin, as him saying that Obi-Wan's ready for the trials, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I'll take Anakin because my apprentice is awesome. So, you know, he's totally awesome now. He's in some ways more wise than I am. So I can take on Anakin. I don't know, Qui-Gon was always just so much more, like, chill to me. I don't know.
Yeah. Obi-Wan was also like 25, if I'm remembering correctly, in The Phantom Menace. So I think he was well ready to move on from being a Padawan anyway.
No, it's true. Like, with how old Ewan McGregor was at the time, it's ridiculous. He still has that Padawan braid, you know?
Yeah.
The dude was ready.
He was ready 4 years ago, probably. I do get the sense that a lot of the Qui-Gon... a lot of the feelings around Qui-Gon probably stem from this book series, in the sense that that's what you hear, and that's what Sig, you were talking about. Like, even if you've never read it, because it's used and referred to so often, and it is technically was once part of canon, but it's legends. And this is the impression you kind of get of certain characters, and Qui-Gon, it breaks my heart that he's kind of like treated like the abusive Jedi master. And I'm like, this could not be further from the truth of who his character is meant to be. And I think some people, like, for example, the Master and Apprentice book that Claudia Gray wrote. I think she wrote a really great relationship and great insight into their dynamic. But I also still got that sense of, like, you can't help but write him in a way that he's not that good of a person. And I'm like, I wish I understood it better. But I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head that your source material from decades ago, you know, this really started here. And you had this, and you had the Phantom Menace, and you can draw your own opinions on that. And then Qui-Gon might not have been a really great guy. And it sucks because I think he's meant to be. I think how George Lucas wrote him, he was meant to be kind of the Obi-Wan figure in the original trilogy. That's what he said in the making of these movies in the prequel trilogy. And he wrote Qui-Gon for that purpose of being this wiser, very grounded, very in tune with the Force, and really understands life and really understands, you know, balance. And I think he did a really good job showing that in The Phantom Menace. So I think this episode should just be Qui-Gon. Why? We should definitely make a whole episode on him at some point. But it's sad. It's sad that he's a fan, and I've seen it. We've read it. We've read tons of stories and tons of people's critical analyses where, you know, he just kind of gets the short end of the stick. And it's unfortunate that it's reinforced the way it is in the Jedi Apprentice books.
Yeah.
And I don't think he's a bad guy in the Jedi Apprentice books. I just think maybe he wasn't in a state of mind to be a master after all to Obi-Wan. So you had this dynamic of Qui-Gon having very specific expectations after having his last Padawan turn to the dark side, and Obi-Wan, who is just your good old homeboy, trying so hard to meet those expectations, and he's kind of running after him constantly for approval and affection, and that never really happens.
Yeah, and I think, we've talked a lot about the ways that it, like, impacts the kind of collective understanding of Qui-Gon as a character, but I think it also really impacts the collective understanding of Obi-Wan as a character, because there is that element of, like, all his girlfriends die. It's kind of pathetic. I think it's the James Lucerno book, one of the Vader series, in which there's that quote about how Obi-Wan was always meant for infinite sadness. And like, this is a really pervasive, like, in almost any book that he's in, there's this element of like, he's just a little bit sad, like nothing ever kind of goes right for him. He's like a sad trombone noise personified, like everything always has to suck, everyone he loves dies, like he's the Elrond of the Star Wars universe. Like, it just like, and but I think honestly, I think part of that comes from these books, because like, obviously, yes, he did raise Anakin, but his life wasn't that bad. Like, if you just look at the actual source material, I'm not sure that that's a supported characterization either. And he doesn't strike me, the person that he is in Attack of the Clones and the person that he is in Revenge of the Sith is not a person who's constantly sad. I mean, obviously sad things happen to him. He grieves like a normal person. But this characterization of him as just this sad, pathetic little wet blanket, I think also comes from these books. And it's one that I see all the time. In fact, we crack jokes all the time about Obi-Wan's like incredibly sad existence.
We do it a lot. Like you said, it's not that he hasn't had bad things happen to him. He's had very terrible things happen to him that people shouldn't experience, but also the source material is telling us that he is able to deal with them, and he's not constantly unhappy. You know, he has, I think we can infer from his personality in the 3 movies, in the prequels, and I guess, you know, the man he was by the original trilogy, that he's good. He's fine. And he gets through things, and he was relatively happy, I think, in moments around people he cared about in Attack of the Clones. You know, he had a friend in the diner. He got on well with people in the Clone Wars. He's a natural flirt. He likes to charm people. And I think he had, in my opinion, humbly, I think he had a good relationship with Qui-Gon in The Phantom Menace, and that they worked super well together and they understood each other. They were kind of supposed to be the ideal master-Padawan relationship, which is why when Qui-Gon dies, it's just that much more visceral and painful, because it mattered so much to Obi-Wan. And so I don't buy it.
That's a good point. I don't think he would have been as broken up about his death had you know, if Qui-Gon was such a terrible person to put up with, that Obi-Wan's like gritting his teeth getting through these days, you know?
Yeah, if they'd had a drama-filled, fractured relationship for his whole life. Yeah. And I do think your point about it, like, that they are representing an ideal relationship, that this is what the Jedi, because that's the Jedi Order's normalcy. That's how we're introduced, right? This is what a Master and Padawan are. This is what they look like. And then we're about to see it go wrong when we have Anakin as the Padawan, and we see how that differs from what we've already seen. So I think it's a bit one note to just apply that directly on, but I think you're definitely right to say that that's how we're meant to be taking it. And it's very interesting that then the backstory is filled in of like, what is truly a disastrous childhood, and certainly worse than anything that was done to Anakin. Like,
oh my gosh. And then, because like you see the follow-up series, which is the Jedi Quest. Oh my god, what is it called? Jedi Quest. I'm so sorry. You see the Jedi Quest books, which is like more sadness and more just like miscommunication, and Anakin, it's a rough going, and I'm like, I don't like it's continuing the cycle of how you're perceiving Obi-Wan or perceiving these characters, and it's not great. Fun, but not great. Although the Quest books are not very fun, they're just very sad.
They are quite sad.
Yeah, I feel like not every book has to be tragic. Like, not every story has to be a tragedy.
Yes.
You know?
Can we print that? Can we put that in writing? Not every book, not every story has to be tragic.
Well, yeah, because I mean, all of us, I think, have an appreciation for the absurd and the humorous. And when I think about this, like, certainly even like fan works that I enjoy the most, it's the stupidly funny. And I think that's why we all have such a soft spot for Attack of the Clones as well, because that is the pinnacle of stupidly funny.
I hardcore agree with that.
Anytime the movie gets knocked, I'm like, you guys haven't unlocked your third eye yet. You haven't seen what I've seen.
Exactly. I think that we definitely prefer like the funny and the clever over the dramatic tragedies. And we also cling to like funny lines and funny parts. You know, we talk about them constantly. It's like,
Yeah.
so I'm glad that there's at least some levity in the Star Wars universe. I wish there was more. And I mean, in the books, or that there was just more, like, there could be a comedy in Star Wars, right? I mean,
yeah. Oh, there's so much you can laugh about.
Yeah, there should be. I was just going to say that I would argue these books are a comedy. At least that's how I read them, but I don't think that's how they were intended.
Unintentional comedy.
Yeah. I find them very funny.
Like, it's because you and I are reading them and we're like, oh my god, look what Obi-Wan's going through right now.
Genuinely, yes. I mean, it gets funnier with every book. It probably shouldn't. I'm probably just a terrible person, but...
Well, see, that's kind of like when you see something so dire, you have to find the humor in it. And I find it's nice that in Star Wars, you can still have moments of light and moments of humor in what is a very tragic story. I think Star Wars is a very sad story and very almost cautionary tale. But you should still have some good times, and I would like to see more of those good times.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the last thing I wanted to touch on, if we kind of zoom out even further, is this concept, again, and probably not intended to be funny, but to my eyes, hilarious, of all the different things you can be if you're not good enough to be a Jedi. So you can be sent to Jedi farming school, or Jedi doctor school, or presumably Jedi NGO school. Can you be Jedi sanitation? Like...
Yeah, I don't like it. Like the Agri-Corps, that just sounds too much like it sounds too real, honestly.
Oh.
Something that you could do here on Earth, like the AmeriCorps. You know, you could go and see that instead of the Peace Corps. It sounds too mundane, honestly. I don't know.
It's like you didn't pass your A levels, so you got to do what you got to do now. You know, like
like little Jedi dropouts.
Oh, it's so strange.
Yeah, it's like for the Jedi quibs. Sorry.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Quibs.
Yeah. I mean, knowing what we know and what we think about the Jedi Order, I find it hilariously incongruous that they would be kind of boxing people away this way. It seems much more likely that they would kind of find aptitudes in people and adapt what they do to kind of fit those aptitudes. There is something quite charming I like about the idea of having Force abilities that are used for either research or enabling plants to grow or rescuing biospheres and other things like that. Like, I think there's a place for that in the universe. It's just the idea that at 13 you get sorted into your houses and not everyone gets to be a Gryffindor is just really funny to me.
It's so depressing if you're that kid that's like, nobody wanted you, so we gotta send you off to the Agri-Corps.
Yeah, Farmer Kenobi.
Yeah, I'd want to go back to my parents. Like,
yeah.
You know? I don't know.
Yeah. I guess, everyone needs like a Jedi level accounting. That'd be helpful to the...
Jedi accountants.
It's true. I mean, I wouldn't mind the librarian position. That seemed cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It presents you with limited options in this book series of if you manage to get a master or not, which I guess Star Wars itself never really talks about that. Like, of what happens if you don't find a master. What, do you just kind of continue aging out and put to use elsewhere?
That's just so sad. It reminds me of like kids needing to be adopted. You know?
Yeah.
Like going to those please adopt me meetings or whatever. That's just sad. I don't like it.
I mean, do we ever have any indications that there are too many Padawans as compared to masters?
I don't think so, because I think the Jedi Order wasn't exactly very large.
No, I didn't have the impression it was. I mean, I think the only argument that there are not enough masters is the fact that they gave Anakin a Padawan. He's presumably a person of last resort.
Poor Ahsoka.
Yoda, in his infinite wisdom, looked at Ahsoka and said, I have the master just for you.
You seem like a demon child. We'll put you with the last one we had.
The fact that Obi-Wan initially asked for her, though, that was like, he was ready to get another Padawan. He wanted to do teaching again.
Yeah. And he never got one. So they can't have been that short. Because, if he'd asked for one and there was a real desperation to get masters, presumably they would have given him one as well.
Yeah. I will say Obi-Wan does say our Padawan when it comes to Ahsoka, so I'm like, she was co-parented 100%.
I think Ahsoka needed that. And also, if Ahsoka was like my little grand Padawan, I'd be like, you're mine, because she's so great. Right. So that is my whirlwind introduction to the Jedi Apprentice series.
Excellent.
Do we have any final thoughts on these most excellent books?
Real fun, real dire sometimes. There is a special place in my heart for sad, weenie Obi-Wan. Like, I think he's so fun and delightful and funny. I probably shouldn't find him funny like you, but I do. I can't help it. You just want to hug him. It's hilarious. But let's as a community remember that these are not canon and should not represent, what George Lucas intended. If that means anything to fandom anymore, I don't know if people care what George Lucas really intended. It matters to me though, and there should be a little line drawn of what we consider certain characters to be and certain Jedi philosophy to be, and what it is not.
Yeah. I think for me, the thing that kind of surprises me when I was thinking about this episode is how much I think it has had a massive impact. And it has been somewhat, unfortunately, unavoidable. Like, even if you've never read these books, you've come across their influence if you've engaged with kind of Star Wars fan culture in any way, which is kind of cool, but kind of also, it would not have been my first choice of like books to have that level of impact, as much as I do enjoy them. And they were the first books that I read of Star Wars as well, so they'll have like a sort of special place in my heart always because of that. But yeah, I think that they're actually they kind of punch higher than their weight class, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool.
They're definitely enjoyable reads.
Yeah, as I said, do go read them. Form your own thoughts. Let us know what you think. Tell me which bits you thought were funniest, because I could laugh about these books all day.
The Rock's big. Did we even talk about The Rock?
Oh, The Rock was coming. The Rock was in my lightning round questions.
Okay. I'll keep mum on it then.
Yeah. Shall we move on to lightning round questions then?
Yes, please.
Sure.
All right. Question number 1. My favorite quote from these books is on Obi-Wan's 13th book birthday. Qui-Gon gives him his special rock, which he says is a forced rock. And he gives it to Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan treasures it because presumably he's never had a gift before because his life sucks. And he holds on to it. And then later in the same book, he nearly gets his mind wiped, but he keeps the rock in his hand and it manages to keep his mind intact. But there's an amazing sentence where he realizes that the only thing Qui-Gon had ever given him was a rock, which is my favorite quote from these books.
I love it so much.
My question is, if you had to give sad Obi-Wan a birthday present, what would it be?
Oh my god, this is the best question you've ever asked me. Okay, instinctively, because this is lightning round, the first thing I thought of was a pair of hand-knitted socks. Like, I think he would treasure those with the love that's poured into them. Hand knitting. I mean, could he fathom that someone was so kind to do that for him? I don't know. Not this sad weenie Obi-Wan, but I would give that to him. And seal my friendship with this dude forever. He will be loyal forever because I gave him a pair of socks.
That was genuinely quite nice.
Yeah.
That reminds me of this fic I read once, where Anakin just makes scarves for everybody.
Oh, yeah! It's so good.
That one?
Yeah, it's brilliant.
He takes up knitting and avoids the dark side.
Yeah, by knitting.
It's so good.
Now, why wasn't... That was so good. That should have been an actual book. A Legends book. No, it really was good. I laughed.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
Some of these fics are better than anything that you would read.
Yes.
In these series sometimes, you know. The first thing that came to my mind was a hug. I would give him a hug.
Aww.
I would give him a hug too.
Oh, you guys are so nice. I was gonna give him a soda bottle because it felt on brand. just like from the vending machine right in front of him. It just like, it felt the appropriate amount of horrible, but you guys actually went with nice things. I was just going to go up to the vending machine and like, it wouldn't even be Sprite. It would be like some off-brand Sprite.
Oh my God.
Or just like, you know, like Morrison's own Coca-Cola, but it's not properly Coke. Like,
so this has the energy of when I asked what you would do if you had like power, unlimited power of the dark side. You guys gave really excellent, like, I'm going to save the world answers, and I said unlimited shrimp.
Yeah. You guys are better people than I am. But I think we knew that already.
Still love you, Stick. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I didn't even give him a thing, you know? This is the first thing that came into my head was a hug, but like I would want to give him something meaningful. I don't know.
I think the hug probably means quite a lot to him. At least definitely the Obi-Wan of these books. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, or like a series of books, maybe. I don't know. A good series of books.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't knock the magic of a really nice, squeezy, warm hug.
Yeah. He's a kid who's never had therapeutic touch, let's be honest.
Oh, that poor kid. Yeah.
Right. Question number 2. If you were thrown out of the Jedi Order at 13, which corps would they send you to?
If I had the Jedi ability, send me to the medical corps. Like, I'll like force power my way through some kind of surgery. That'll be neat, you know? Yeah. Put my brain to use.
If there's some kind of crafty corps, that's where they'd send me.
Oh, yeah, like textile corps or something. Yeah.
That'd be fun.
Yeah. They would send me to some sort of, I don't know. If they found out I could draw, I'd be...
Wait, I want to change my answer. What if we did like a video game corps? Like, what if I was part of the developer team? That would be fun.
Yeah. I like it, Addie. You could go to like a blacksmith's guild or like the scholars, sculptors. That would be cool.
Something like that, exactly.
Yeah. I like that a lot.
You could probably still work in the temple because they have like statues and stuff and architecture. And...
Yeah. The temple sculptor. That'd be well cool.
Yeah. I wouldn't mind that.
I think I'd actually quite like the Agri-Corps. I mean, my first instinct was to say sanitation, but I think that I would probably actually quite enjoy being a farmer and like, especially if you could do like research on different plant types and like maintaining biospheres and like bringing life back to dead planets. That would be quite fun.
Yeah, you'd be in like the horticulture area of the Agri-Corps. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it'd be really cool.
Who's the Madame Pomfrey? Is she
the herbologist. Yeah.
It's not Pomfrey. It's
Sprout. Yes. Yeah.
Sprout. That's what it is. Yeah, you could come up with like Jedi potions and stuff.
Yeah, it'd be cool. I think. And then final question: if you could have a new Jedi Apprentice type series, so the following one Master and Padawan relationship from its start to its end, which Padawan and Master relationship would you want a series of books on? It doesn't have to be the same type of book as Jedi Apprentice, just following the two of them.
I would want more Caleb and Deepa, honestly.
I would love the actual Mace and Deepa Padawan ship. I would love to actually see that and see just how much love there was.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to see a woman master. I think that's what I would want to see.
Yeah.
They've all been dudes.
Yep.
Not that that's horrible, because...
Something new.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean.
Something new, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's like the trope I was talking about. Like, I've read it. I've seen it. Give me something new.
Yeah. Yeah, I, for similar reasons, was thinking of Luminara and Barriss Offee, just because I don't think we've seen
that would be hella
anything like them.
interesting.
Yeah, and I really like Luminara. I mean, she's always set up in the Clone Wars as kind of a counterpoint to Anakin, and she's quite stodgy in comparison, I guess. She seems quite, I don't know, rule-abiding, but I've always liked her approach. I think it would be really interesting to see her raising a Padawan. And I'm going to pretend that I don't know what happens to Barriss afterwards.
Yeah.
I do not see, I do not know.
And Luminara is very centered as a Jedi,
I love her. Love her. I love her energy.
Yeah.
Her and Deepa, like, are just the most calming. whenever I read anything with them in or watch anything with them in, I'm like, I just feel calmed and centered, and like I want to know them as people.
I agree. Very good energy comes from them.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think that wraps up today's episode.
Yay!
Yeah, thanks for joining us. If you have read the Jedi Apprentice series, do let us know and let us know what you think. Do you think it's a comedy? Do you think that our interpretations of it are terrible? Do you love them? Do you hate them? If you haven't read them and you're going to, let us know and we can, I don't know, do a little read-along. That would be really fun.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Please text or like Twitter send like all of the bits that you're reading and all of the sad things that happened to Obi-Wan. So thank you for tuning into the Kyber Collective. If you like what you heard, please give us a like, and if you've got something to say, drop us a comment. Both of these help make us easier to find for other fans and are the best way you can support our work. If you'd like to keep up to date with our episodes, you can subscribe, and you can always talk to us on Twitter at Kyber Collective. We'll be back with another episode in 2 weeks, and until then, remember, the crystal is the heart of the blade. The heart is the crystal of the Jedi is the crystal of the Force is the blade of the heart. We are all intertwined. The crystal, the blade, the Jedi. You are one.